Okay, I'm hoping that by completing the last tutorial A, you'll have some sense of how to do the exports to Illustrator. The only thing I'm going to do differently this time is I'll show you how I tend to export these types of files, and then how to compile them in Illustrator. And then before we go to Illustrator, I'll show you how to create some charts, because I think they might be kind of useful for our summaries, in our visual. So to start with the exports, let's just pretend that we are going to export the hypsometric tint and the hillshade. And in the last video I made these semi-transparent. So I'm going to make them full value because I want the image that I bring into Illustrator, I want it to have as much contrast as possible so that I can decide how much contrast I want to use in Illustrator. So in general, if ever an object has transparency, I usually turn it off before I send it to Illustrator. So put this all the way up, and I just really don't like that. So I'm going to stretch it a little bit here. See if I can stretch it just a hair. There we go. So we refocus the stretch so it's a little bit more diverse. Okay, so now I've got to go make my layout, and I think, as you might remember, it's good to center your layout around your study area. So I'm going to go here, new print layout. I'm going to do a portrait orientation for this one. So ANSI A, this is letter, 8.5 by 11, and it's going to be a portrait orientation. So I right click my layout, page properties, ANSI A, portrait. I'm going to add my map over here, do the whole thing like that. And use my move content tool, move item content, and center this map. And I'm going to zoom in with my mouse wheel, and that's not too bad actually. But it looks like I'm going to have to go in a little bit more to kind of get a clean edge there. So it looks like 380,000. It's 1 to 380k. So I'm going to go. Let's try 360. 1, 2, 3. Wow, that's very lucky. I never get that close the first shot. That's almost perfect. There we go. Nice. So I can see a little bit of white edge at the border, but I think that'll get covered up. So I am pretty happy with that right there. I'm going to save that. And now when I export, oopsie, I need to scooch it just a hair more, maybe. Well, okay. Leave it alone. If I exported this now as a JPEG, it's going to include this line work here. So I want to shut those lines off. And I want just the raw kind of hypsometric tint there. So I've shut those off. I'm going to hit refresh. And I'm going to go do a 1-to-1. So it's all locked. If I go 1-to-1 with a page, it'll show me kind of what it's going to look like. Yeah, and I think that's fine. So it's not perfect because there is this little white gap that it'll export those as white pixels as well. But with my boundary, my margin, my neat line, it's going to come in and cover that. So I'm not too worried about it. So now we say export as an image. I'm going to export it to linked files because we usually link rasters in Illustrator. So I'm going to call this hypsometric tint. 300 dpi is good. In general, if you're going 1-to-1, your publishing dimensions are going to be exactly what you're exporting, then 300 dpi should be what you export it at. So say OK. So that exported. And now I can just go back here, turn off my DEM, turn on my hillshade, go back to my layout, and it refreshed already automatically. So now I'll say export as image, and I'll call this hillshade. Save. Okay. So those are the only two images I'm going to export for this. I'm not even going to find an aerial or anything because this is kind of a regional, area, and I tend to think that aerial images don't really look good at a certain scale. I don't know, it's nice to see, in my mind, the kind of layout of the land, the topography. So I'll let you figure out. I think you should know at this point how to export all of the vector layers that you want. But I will show you before we do that how to create some thematic symbols. So what we've got is we've got all these ecological assets, right? And so we probably want to bring all of these in different layers into our Illustrator file in case we want to create kind of a thematic map, especially if it's this similar to that kind of beginning with habitat style map. And there's an example of that under 04 resources, I think it is. Yep, under the resources, I've put an example of one of the beginning with habitat maps, so you can see that. But for these summaries, which are numbers, hundreds or thousands of acres of things per watershed, it might be nice to see some kind of symbol that represents the relative acreages of these environmental assets. So we've already done the analysis. We have in the attribute table, we have the data for how much is in each watershed. But let's make a visual symbol that shows them so that we can kind of see it. So this won't be under symbology because it's not a geographic. We're not symbolizing a geographic thing. We're putting a chart kind of over the centroid to represent the whole object. So this is a geographic summary. We're not really we're not doing basic symbology anymore. So now I'm going to go. We could do a histogram. I think it'll look a little messy, but let's just do a pie chart because it's easy and it's right here. So the first thing we want to do is select our attributes that we want to have in the pie chart, which let's do all of these assets, the acres of the wetland, the habitat, and the conserved lands. And we can change these colors in Illustrator, so I don't really care that they're random or kind of messy right now. So I think that's fine. The pie chart is going to show kind of what percentage of the assets are each of these categorical things. But I think we should also alter the size of the pie chart. So it'll be a proportional pie chart based on kind of the total sum of these things together. So I'm happy with that. I could hit apply, and now I just get all of these pie charts, and they're all the same size. But it's not, in my mind, as honest because it's just showing a proportion, just a total proportion. It's not even showing any kind of area adjusted thing. So in order to show relatively the sums between this entire region where things are, we need to alter the size. And so we're going to scale the size. And you might think, oh, let's go scale the size by the total acreage of the entire watershed. But that means it's actually, I think we want to see the size of these circles be proportional to the actual sum of them all, right? So for instance, if this watershed, even if it's a big watershed, has a very small number of total acres, we would want this to be small, even though it's a big watershed. So we can't just choose acres watershed to adjust this. I think we need to actually add all of these together. But what's nice is that they give us this this expression dialog that we can just do it here, and we don't have to add a new column. So I'm going to say that we're going to adjust them based on, let's see here, this plus this plus this plus this plus that. And so that should be fine. If we hit apply, it's probably going to disappear. Yeah, they disappeared because we've put the maximum value at 0 as a default. So we need to find of this expression, what is the maximum value in our study area? And it's so one of the watersheds has a total of 18,000 acres of ecological assets total. So we hit apply to that. And so now we see them and they're pretty small. So what does that mean? Now it just means that we need to scale the size of the symbols just so that it's more meaningful. And there are a bunch of different philosophies about how to scale different types of diagrams. In general, we should scale linear objects. You can do linearly, but objects like circles or squares, if you're going to do charts that the volume represents a quantity, you should really do some kind of area adjustment or a measure like that. Don't use diameter. So we're just going to increase this. Let's just see how much. Just a little bit. Let's go up to 10. Apply. And the real test will be what it looks like in our layout view. So I think that looks pretty good. I want them to be over the centroid. Let's just see what it means by around the centroid. I think those are doing the same thing. Occasionally, if the centroid, if it's a curved shaped object, like even Booth Bay here, sometimes the centroid may be actually out of the polygon, so you can force it inside the polygon as well. But I think this is working out. I don't know if we really need to do much else to this, so let's just see. That looks good. Rendering. I think they're all okay. So I'm just going to say okay. We're going to go to our layout view and see what it looks like. I'm going to hit refresh. You know, I think the charts could be maybe a little bigger, but I can do that. I could do that in Illustrator. I'll just make them a little bigger. We'll scale up to 15 and then we'll export. So go back here, go back to size, go to 15, apply. What the heck? Let's do 20. Apply. So that looks big there, but I think it's going to be fine. Here, refresh. That's okay. I like that. It's good enough. We can scale them all together in Illustrator if we need to, but I think that'll be good. So now that I want to export this, I'm actually going to shut off these ecological assets and just export this object. So now we go, let's see, here we go. Like this, refresh. I'm going to export it as an SVG. And we're going to export it to, linked files. I think that's what we did before. So proportional pie symbols. In general, I try to stick away from pie charts as much as possible, but occasionally they are useful, just because it shows, especially if there's similar ratios of things, it shows difference in ratios, which is kind of a tricky visual variable. Save. We want to always export as vectors. I don't want anything simplified. I don't want any metadata. And we are not exporting text this time, but we probably will on a future export. So we want to click that. And now I'm going to say save. Okay. So assuming that you've exported everything that you want to export, we'll do the build together in Illustrator, and that will be probably faster than you can follow, but you can just do it afterward. I would recommend, as I said before, to not try to export these contours unless your machine has a little bit of oomph behind it. You would want to create contours using the 30-meter DEM, because that'll be a much more reasonable number of points for it to manage. So anyway, let's build it. The hypsometric tint, I'm going to highlight that and go Control-Shift-P for placing an object. And so I'm going to grab my hypsometric tint, and I'm going to place that in the upper left, and it comes in like that. Go to my hillshade, do the same thing. Place. Boom. And then I'm going to shut that off. Let's bring in the hydrography next. We're going to do the open water. And so for this, I'm actually going to open the hydrography file that I made, the SVG file. And then I'm going to select, see, there we go. Select by same fill color all of the open water, copy or cut, and then paste in place. And then let's shut that off, and I'll go get the flow lines. Select by same stroke color. Of course, now I see that there's a coastline category that I don't want in there. So I'm actually going to re-export that one and come back to it later. So let's forget that. I'll show you what I mean here. So under the flow lines, you'll notice that it includes coastline as one of its things. And so if you want to get rid of those, you can go to symbolize and categorize it by type, and then you'll see that, oh, I see, okay, yep, there's kind of this coastline thing going on. So then, you know, if I wanted to re-export that, what I would do is I'd go shut off the coastline, and now that looks better. Those look like streams, and then the orange ones are streams as well, but they're kind of flow lines underneath open water, so that's why they call them artificial paths. And paste in place. Cool, and just remember your hotkeys for that. There should be a thing about that. So I'm going to turn them all the same blue as the water, so as the open water. So it'll look like that now. And probably I'll back off those flow lines so they're not so strong. You know, a couple of ticks like that. And now let's do a little bit of symbology just so we feel like we have a base map. I'm going to turn on the relief, and I'm going to turn the hypsometric tint down to maybe 10% opacity. So opacity is this tab right here, or transparency is called. If you can't find it, then you can always go up to Window and find transparency, or do Shift Control F10, or I think on a Mac it would be Shift Command F10. So for basic maps, and when you get started doing cartography, a lot of it is actually toning things down and kind of diminishing things that look too strong so that something can sit on top. And the easiest way to do that is by adjusting the transparency. So let's just start with that. We'll go 10% for that, and you can barely see it. So let's go to 20. We'll probably back it off again later. So now you can kind of see a little bit. I want to make this water a little less intense. So I'm going to go to the water, and we'll see what we have. We've got, let's just make it a 10% cyan. And that's going to look really light, but that's okay. I like that for now. And now we'll go to the flow lines and also make them the same color. So that'll be a 10% cyan, like that. So it looks kind of gross, but I think once we add more layers, it'll come together a little bit. So this hillshade's really, really, really strong, obviously. But let's click that layer now and change its transparency. And we'll change that to, let's see what 10 does. And so 10, that doesn't look too bad. That's starting to kind of convince me that this is a map and a landscape. So there's kind of a base map, and I think this is so busy that I'm not even going to bring in those contours we took so much pains to make. I think the contours would make this map very, very busy, and it would be too much. So I'm done with the relief. I'm not going to worry about the contours. I've got my flow lines all done here. You know, maybe I could bring in the wetlands would be the next thing. And it's a big file. You'll probably have to deal with a lot of your computer crashing and then deciding how you're going to try to deal with it, and exporting in smaller bits. The other thing that's annoying about Q is that it exports the strokes, so sometimes I just shut those off as these really big objects. So one of the first things I tend to do is shut the stroke off. But those are all of the wetlands, so I'm going to say copy, and yeah, it can be a lot. Hopefully you'll do okay with it. Paste in place. Paste in place. So there are our wetlands, and they're kind of hard to see, but I think what I'm going to do is just make them a very soft kind of teal color maybe. And then we'll make those very transparent as well. We'll go to another 10% and see if that does anything that we like. Maybe a little stronger. Maybe we'll make it 50. It's a little too strong. How about 25? It's not too bad. It makes it look a little more lush than it really is, but not too bad to start us off. Okay, so the next thing to do, I think, is let's not worry about these other ecological assets because it's just going to make the map really busy. I want to just make a watersheds map and bring in those proportional pie charts, I think. So let's go to, we'll open up our next SVG file, which will be boundaries. And You know, we do the town boundaries. I'll bring those in first. Paste. And I'm going to make them white. If I didn't, it would be fine, but I just think they're a little loud. So I want them to sit back, kind of. So I'm going to just make them white like that. They kind of disappear completely, but that's not too bad like that. I like that. And there are little anomalies, like this is a territory, I think, so I'm going to, you know, you have to kind of decide if you want to delete some of these anomalies because they can be kind of harsh to look at, you know, not very attractive. But now we can see our towns and we can see our base map. Let's bring in the watersheds now, like this, and put the watersheds here, paste in place. We'll get rid of that, fill. So now we can kind of see our watersheds. They're a little strong. So maybe we'll make them, we're also going to make the round cap so that they're a little cleaner. You see how they're bumpy? We'll go round cap like that and round corner. 0.5 maybe. And, you know, maybe they're watersheds, so we should make them some kind of blue or teal. So there are watershed boundaries. This map is going to take a lot of work to make it look good. There's probably too much data happening. But let's put this up in the features so it sits on top. Let's just bring in those proportional, you know, the kind of proportional circles or proportional pie charts. And we're going to call it good with that as a demo for how to bring in data into Illustrator for thematic maps, and we'll let you play with what you want to symbolize. It may even be better to try to symbolize one watershed or something like that. We'll kind of decide what we're going to do there a little later. So now we go File, Open, and we'll bring in the proportional pie charts. And the awkward thing with these is we're going to actually bring them all in, you know, as separate chunks. So they're not really independent circles at the moment. I mean, I don't think they are. No, they're all different pieces. So that's a little annoying, but we'll do it like this. And we'll make sure to put them all in the right spot. I think the one that I just grabbed was the deer areas. Okay, so I think there's a couple things here. One is that I'm realizing that these being summed together, I think we should have realized when you're doing that, was because we know they overlap with each other, this sum is including multiple locations, probably more than once, almost certainly more than once. So I'm not sure that our methodology for creating these circles is 100% bulletproof, because let's say, you know, if it counts a wetland and a tidal wader wildlife habitat as the same place twice, then that's getting added twice. So just something to be aware of, that this is a demo, and this is the kind of stuff we'll be discussing together in class. For symbology-wise, you know, also the idea of a conserved land being part of an ecological asset rather than an attempt at conserving that ecological asset, there's kind of a semantic difficulty there that, you know, perhaps conserved lands should be considered different than an ecological asset. Maybe that's a measure of effort. For the efforts that we're doing today, we'll just start to symbolize them and make the map look presentable. I think the first thing I would do is I would just make the birds look similar. So let's go with this, the tidal and the inland being different shades of brown. So I'm just going to grab the eyedropper tool with an eye and hit the brown there, and then I'll go up to my color and just kind of alter the color a little bit. so that we get a sense that they're different categories but they're related and kind of ordinal. I usually think of conservation land as green, and I think that's symbolized that way on maps pretty frequently. So let's have conserved lands be green instead of the deer, or whatever that was, the wetlands. And let's have the wetlands be a teal color, because that's what we're using on the map. So that's pretty good. And then for the deer habitat, let's just have that be a gray, because it's the most unrelated category, and we want to differentiate it. So, you know, this is pretty imperfect, but it's already looking a little better in terms of the semantics, right? We've got conserved land as green, wetlands as a teal, and then all of the habitats have this kind of earth tone going on. But yeah, it's more and more it's becoming very obvious to me that this map would be much better if we were reporting, you know, percentage of lands conserved for each of these categories, rather than having this be its own category. But if you have any questions about that, we can talk about it in discussion. A couple last touches. I think that now that we've made teal the wetlands here, these watershed boundaries are kind of being robbed by that. And so I think we should put the watershed boundaries, which are in the features here, below the pie charts. And I think the watersheds should be a completely different color. Perhaps it's kind of a black color or something like that, or a dark gray. Yeah, that's starting to look okay. Great. Well, I think I could tweak this forever, but I kind of think you can see at this point that this map needs a legend, it needs a title, it needs to be simplified. There's too many busy things going on. We probably need to delete some of these watershed boundaries for the island watersheds that dump right into the ocean. So cleaning this up would mean deciding what layers are really helping the map tell its story and which ones are not. Okay, here's an example of what I'd consider a pretty solid rough draft. Definitely has some issues, but that's the whole point, is to try something out and we'll discuss it. So, all right, see you in the next video.